Well, here we are at our last session in this 20-part series on the prophetic panorama. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been a blessing and that you've seen the importance, the extreme importance for Seventh-day Adventists to understand these things so that we can share them with the world. Before we begin our last study together, the title is The Final Test. We want to have a word of prayer to ask the Lord to be with us. Father in heaven, as we study about the final test that will divide the world into two groups, we ask that you will show us how to be in your group, how to receive the seal of God, and be faithful until the end. Use us also to teach others so that they can choose the right side. Be with us, enlighten us. We pray in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. As we examine the book of Revelation, one thing is very clear, and that is that the final crisis will involve two objects of worship and their respective sign of authority. The Bible tells us that on the one side will be those who honor the true Creator, and they will have His seal. On the other hand are those who worship the beast, and they will have his mark. So basically, the end time crisis is all about worship. The final test is all about worship. In fact, the first 4 commandments will be the point of conflict at the end of time. Let me just summarize that so that we can see how worship is involved in the final crisis. How is the first commandment involved? Well, we are told in Revelation 13, verses 3 and 4, that everyone on the earth will worship the beast. Would that be a violation of the first commandments? Thou shalt have no other gods before me? Absolutely. What about the second commandment? In Revelation 13, verse 14, we're told that the beast from the earth will make an image of the first beast, and everyone will have to bow down before the image. Does that involve the second commandment? Thou shalt not bow down before images? Absolutely. How is the third commandment involved? In Revelation 13, verse 6, we are told that the beast blasphemes the name of God. How about the fourth commandment? Is that commandment involved in the final crisis? Absolutely. The Creator has His sign, and on the other side, the beast has his. However, even though the whole world, according to Revelation, will worship the beast and accept his authority, there will be a small remnant that will refuse to worship the beast. Thus, there will be two groups at the end of time. One very large group and one small remnant. The large group follows the beast or wanders after the beast, whereas the small remnant follows the Lamb wherever the Lamb goes. And so we are going to study about this end time crisis over the issue of worship. We want to begin by finding in Scripture what distinguishes the true God from all false pretenders. Go with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse 26. We're going to notice now what distinguishes the true God from all false pretenders, from those who claim to be. 1 Chronicles 16 and verse 26. It says there, "For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens." What distinguishes the true God from all false pretenders? The fact that God is the Creator. You see, false gods cannot create. Only God can create. That is the one distinguishing mark of the true Creator. Now, because God is the Creator, the only true God, what do we owe Him? We owe Him worship. Let's go to Psalm 95, verses 1 through 6. Psalm 95, verses 1 through 6. When I was pastor of Fresno Central Church, we would read this passage at the beginning of every worship service. It states here, "Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before His presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to Him with psalms. For the Lord is the great God and the great King above all gods." Now notice this. "In His hand are the deep places of the earth. The heights of the hills are His also. The sea is His, for He made it, and His hands formed the dry land." So these verses are telling us that God is great. He's above all gods because He's the Creator. All belongs to Him. And what should our response be? Verse 6. "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." So because God is the only true Creator God, we as creatures owe Him reverence and worship. We must bow down and kneel before the Lord our Maker. That needs to be our response. Another text that speaks about the response that we should have is found in Nehemiah chapter 9 and verse 6. And this is referring primarily to the heavenly beings. Once again, they praise God because He's the Creator. They worship God because God is the Creator. Nehemiah 9 verse 6 says the following, "You alone are the Lord." Why is He alone the Lord? "You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and everything in it, the sea and all that is in them, and you preserve them all." And now notice, the host of heaven worships you. Why does the host of heaven worship the Lord? Because the Lord is the what? He created the earth and everything in the earth. So the first point is that which distinguishes the true God from all false pretenders is the fact that God is the Creator, and our response to Him should be worship because He is the Creator. But now we notice that God also established a memorial of creation so that we would remember. That memorial is found in Genesis chapter 1. And before we read about the memorial, let's notice the conclusion of the creation story. Genesis 1:31 through chapter 2 and verse 1. Actually, chapter 2 verse 1 belongs with chapter 1. That's another place where the chapter division is not in the right place. You'll see what I mean. Genesis 1:31 through chapter 2 and verse 1. "Then God saw everything that He had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished." When did God finish His work of creation? Which day did God finish His work of creation? Which day? The sixth day, it says here. But now we've got a little problem. Let's read verses 2 and 3 of chapter 2. "And on the seventh day God ended His work which He had done." By the way, don't get thrown off by the fact that in one it says He finished and the other says He ended. It's the same Hebrew word. So it says, on the seventh day God finished His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it He rested from all His work which God had created and made. So the big question is, how can God finish something twice? How could God finish His work the sixth day and then finish it the seventh day? Well, I have an illustration that I think will help us. I want you to imagine a master artist, a painter. First thing that he does, he gets the wood and he makes the frame. Then he puts the canvas to the frame, staples it. And the first day, he adds some background colors to the canvas. And after he finishes his work the first day, he steps back, he says, "It's good." The second day, he portrays some clouds in the sky, blue sky, nice and pretty, the firmament, and so he looks now, steps back after the second day, he says, it's good. The third day, he paints some trees and some flowers and some green grass, and when he finishes his work the third day, he steps back, he says, it's good. The fourth day, he paints a sun in the sky. Sometimes you see the moon in the daytime too, so he makes a little moon there, opaque. And at the end of the fourth day, he steps back, he says, it's good. The fifth day, he paints some birds flying in the sky, and he paints some fish jumping out of the water, and then he steps back at the end of the fifth day, he says, it's good. On the sixth day, he paints some giraffes and some elephants and some cows and some land animals. And then he paints a man and a woman standing in the midst of this beautiful place. And when he finishes the last touches on the canvas, he steps back and he says, it is very good. Has he finished? Yes and no. What is still missing? The signature that identifies who painted the portrait. You see, God painted the picture the first 6 days, and He completed it. But if God did not place His signature on the work of creation, somebody else could claim it. So the seventh-day Sabbath is God's signature that identifies who made everything. So God finished His work the sixth day, and He signed it on the seventh day. Now God did three things with the Sabbath at creation. First, He rested on the Sabbath. By the way, that word rested, the word Shabbat, should really be translated, He ceased. In other words, He didn't create anymore. He stopped creating on the seventh day. It tells us what He didn't do on the seventh day. It's not talking about quality of rest. It's simply saying that God ceased His work of creating on the seventh day. He created no more. He rested, He blessed, and He sanctified or made the day holy. And which day is the Sabbath according to Genesis 2, 2 and 3? The seventh day is the Sabbath. It says it 3 times in Genesis 2, verses 2 and 3. No doubt about it. So what I want you to remember is that the Sabbath is the seventh day, and God blessed the Sabbath day, He sanctified the Sabbath day, and He rested on the Sabbath day. Now let's notice some facts about the days of creation. There is no doubt that the days of creation were literal days of 24 hours each. We have several reasons for that. Number one, in the Old Testament, every time that you find the word day with a numeral qualifier, such as first day, second day, third day, etc., it always refers to a literal 24-hour day. There's no exceptions in the Old Testament. When the word day is used with a numeral adjective, it always means a literal 24-hour day. Secondly, the Bible tells us that each day had an evening and morning. It would be kind of ridiculous to say it was the evening and the morning of the first million years. The expression evening and morning indicates that it is a literal day. Evening when the sun sets and morning when the sun rises. Furthermore, there's an immediacy in the language, in the Psalms. It says that God spoke and it was done. He said it and it stood fast. It doesn't say that it took millions of years for His word to be fulfilled. There's another interesting expression during creation week that is used several times in the creation story, and that is that God spoke and then it was so. That speaks of immediacy, not something that was drawn out over millions and millions of years. But the greatest argument that the days of creation were literal days is found in the fourth commandment of God's law. Because in the fourth commandment, God says, you work 6 and rest on the 7th, because I worked 6 and rested on the 7th. So how could God tell us to work 6 and rest the 7th as He did if the days were not literal? Are you understanding me? So there's no doubt, and you're going to see why I'm covering all these things, there's no doubt that the days of creation were literal days of 24 hours each, just like we know them today. At creation, there was no Jew. So you can't speak of the Jewish Sabbath. Furthermore, there was no sin. So it's not part of the Old Covenant, because at creation, there was no Old Covenant. There was just a covenant between God and Adam and Eve, as long as they were obedient. Now, it's important to realize that at creation, God not only created things, God also created measurements of time. God created the day, which is the amount of time that it takes the earth to make one complete turn on its axis. He created the month, basically the period between one new moon and another. He created the year, the amount of time that it takes the earth to make one complete turn around the sun. But there is one measurement of time which God also created that is totally arbitrary and has no astronomical explanation. That is the week composed of 7 days. God could have made a week of 10 days, a week of 8 days, a week of 5 days. But the reason why the week has 7 days is because God created the week of 7 days. 7 literal 24-hour days. Henry Morris, who was a staunch biblical creationist, I think he passed away a while ago. He wrote this: "The Lord Himself had worked 6 days, then rested on the seventh, setting thereby a permanent pattern for the benefit of mankind." So God worked 6, rested the seventh as a permanent pattern for human beings. Now, Ellen White has a very interesting statement about the week. It's found in Patriarchs and Prophets, page 111. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 111. Like the Sabbath, the week originated at creation, and it has been preserved and brought down to us through Bible history. The sequence of the week has never been lost, is what she's saying. The seventh day today is the same seventh day of creation. She continues writing, God Himself measured off the first week as a sample for successive weeks to the close of time. Like every other, it consisted of 7 literal days. 6 were employed in the work of creation. Upon the 7th, God rested, and here comes an important detail. God rested and then blessed this day and set it apart as a day of rest for man. Now, how do we know that the Sabbath today is the same Sabbath of creation? Somebody came and asked me that question. In fact, it's happened more than once. And I say, are you saying that perhaps the Sabbath today is not the same Sabbath that Jesus kept while He was on earth? He says, yeah, we don't know whether the weekly cycle is the same. So I said, okay, well, let me ask you a question. What day do you go to church? He said, well, I go to church on Sunday. I say, okay, why do you go to church on Sunday? Well, because Jesus resurrected that day. I said, oh, so you're saying that you keep Sunday today because it's the same day that Jesus resurrected when He was on earth, right? He says, yes. I said, well, if Sunday's the same Sunday, the Sabbath is the same Sabbath. But then he says, how do you know that the Sabbath of the days of Christ, okay, he says, granted, the Sabbath back in the days of Christ is the same Sabbath as today. How do you know that the Sabbath in the times of Christ was the same Sabbath of creation? That the sequence wasn't lost between creation and Christ? I said, it's very simple, because my Bible tells me that Jesus was the creator of the Sabbath, and He was not going to keep the wrong day. It's sad that Henry Morris, after that statement that he made, that God worked 6 and rested the 7th, as a teaching to us, a permanent pattern to us. Then he says, well, but the problem is we're not sure that whether this weekly cycle of 7 days has been lost or not, so any day will do. Now, isn't it interesting that in certain countries, like in Europe, the calendars begin the week with Monday. That's interesting. What happens if you begin the week on Monday? Sunday is the seventh day. Is the devil perhaps trying to tell people that Sunday is the seventh day? It doesn't work, though, because the Bible says that Jesus resurrected the first day of the week. So the Bible can refute that very easily. In Colombia, my wife's a country of birth. There's a program that's called El Séptimo Día, the seventh day, and it's broadcast on Sundays, interestingly enough, because they're trying to give the impression that Sunday is the day of rest. You know, isn't it interesting that the papacy, during Holy Week, do you know what Holy Week is? Some of you used to be Catholics, maybe? Holy Week? You know, how many times a year do Catholics keep Palm Sunday? Once a year. How many days do they keep Ash Wednesday? How many days a year? 1 day a year. How many days do they keep? How many days a year do they keep Holy Thursday? 1. How about Holy Friday? 1. How about the Sabbath of Glory, as it's called? 1. So why do they keep Sunday weekly? Are you with me? There's no command in the Bible to keep Sunday weekly in honor of the resurrection of Christ. All of the other days of Holy Week are kept on a yearly basis. But they say you got to keep Sunday every week in commemoration of the resurrection of Christ. By the way, another point that I want us to notice is that God is the owner of everything because He's the Creator. Notice Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. Here, these verses are very well known. The earth is the Lord's, and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. And now comes the reason why everything in the world belongs to God. It says, for, that means because, He has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. To whom does the light belong? To God. To whom does the firmament belong? To God. To whom does the vegetation belong? To God. To whom do the sun and moon and stars belong? To God. To whom do the birds and the fish belong? To God. To whom do the land animals belong? To God. To whom do men and women belong? To God. But the Sabbath is of the Jews. Belongs to the Jews. Now you tell me, how much sense does that make? Did God make the Sabbath too? Of course He made the Sabbath. If He made the Sabbath, then the Sabbath is His too. And that's the reason why in the Bible, God refers to the Sabbath as my holy day. And it's called the Sabbath of the Lord your God, because God rested on it first. It's His holy day. It's not the holy day of the Jews. Now, God not only gave the memorial of the Sabbath, but God commanded man and woman to keep the memorial. Not only did He establish the memorial, but He commanded human beings to keep the memorial. Go with me to Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11, and let's see if the Sabbath of the fourth commandment is the same Sabbath of creation. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember. Remember what? The Sabbath day to keep it holy. Some say that the Sabbath originated at Mount Sinai. Or perhaps, when the manna fell from heaven during the Mosaic dispensation. But the word remember indicates that the Sabbath pre-existed the fourth commandment. Because you can't remember something that didn't happen in the past. For example, we say, remember the Alamo. You can't remember the Alamo unless there was an Alamo experience. Right? So when the commandment says remember, it's saying remember something that happened in the past. God rested, He blessed it, and He sanctified it. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it You shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. And now comes the explanation why. For, that means because, in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. And now listen carefully. And rested, which day? The seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Are those the same three things that God did with the Sabbath at creation? Did He rest? Did He bless? Did He sanctify? Was it the seventh day? Is this the same Sabbath of creation? It is. And God is commanding human beings to what? Commanding human beings to keep it. So the Sabbath is the seventh day. The Sabbath, God rested, God blessed and sanctified both at creation and in the fourth commandment of God's holy law. And the interesting thing is that God made a memorial in time. See, if God had placed a monument in Hawaii and had said to everybody, so that you remember that I'm the Creator, go every week and visit the monument, those who live close, the Hawaiians would have a monopoly. But we don't have to come to the Sabbath comes to us, wherever we are. Because the Sabbath moves, time moves. And so we don't have to go to a shrine. The Sabbath comes to us. It's holy time. Now there's another interesting thing, and I'll just mention this in passing. Who was the Creator? Jesus. All things were made through Him. It says in John chapter 1 and verse 3. Jesus was the Creator. Which day did Jesus finish His work of creation? The sixth day. What did He do on the seventh day? He rested. How about in redemption? What day of the week did Jesus finish His works of redemption? What did He say on the cross? It is what? It is finished. And then what did Jesus, the Redeemer, do on the Sabbath? He rested in the tomb on the Sabbath. So what the Creator did at the beginning, the Redeemer, who is the same person, did in redemption. Thus the Sabbath is not only a sign of the Creator, the Sabbath is also the sign of the Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Two reasons for keeping the Sabbath: to commemorate the Creator and to commemorate the Redeemer. Nevertheless, there are those evangelicals, and this is a very important point that we're going to look at now. Many evangelicals say, yeah, but the Sabbath was not a creation institution. Yeah, it's in the fourth commandment, where God told man to rest on the seventh day, but there's no command in Genesis for man to rest. It says God rested. It doesn't say that God told Adam and Eve, you rest. And so they say that proves that the rest at creation was God's rest, and He did not intend man to rest at that time, maybe later on, the Jews. How do you respond to a question like that? How do you respond to the reason why God did not command Adam and Eve to keep that first Sabbath? I'm going to give you several reasons. But first of all, I want us to go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3 again, and Exodus 20, verse 11, and we're going to notice something very important here. You know, for much of my ministry, I thought that God had commanded Adam and Eve to keep that first seventh-day Sabbath after the first 6 days of creation week. I thought that God had said, okay, the Sabbath is now beginning. Keep the Sabbath holy, Adam and Eve. But then as I studied it more carefully and I read from the Spirit of prophecy, I discovered that God did not bless and sanctify the Sabbath until it ended. In other words, God rested the entire Sabbath day, and when the Sabbath, that first Sabbath ended, He blessed it and sanctified it. You say, is that biblical? Not only is it biblical, but it's also everywhere in the Spirit of prophecy. Let's read Genesis chapter 2 and verse 3. Genesis 2, verse 3. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Why did God bless and sanctify the seventh day? Because in it He rested from all His work which God had created and made. So why did God bless and sanctify the Sabbath? Because He had what? He had rested on that day. Notice once again, Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 11. It says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore, God rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and what? And hallowed it." So when did God bless and make the Sabbath holy? After He had what? After He had rested. It's God's rest that made the Sabbath holy. Every second He rested became holy. Every minute He rested became holy. Every hour He rested became holy. And when He had rested all 24 hours were holy. What makes the Sabbath holy is God's rest. Now you say, "Pastor, that sounds different than what we've heard." Well, let me give you the reasons why God did not command Adam and Eve to keep that first Sabbath. Let me ask you, could God give Adam and Eve the Sabbath before He made it? Was the Sabbath made for man? Did God have to make it before He could give it to man? Of course. It says in Mark 2:27, the Sabbath is made for man. So God first had to make the Sabbath, and then once He had made the Sabbath, He can give it to man. Point number 2. God could not command Adam and Eve to keep the Sabbath holy until it was holy. And it became holy when it what? When it ended. See, God could not tell Adam and Eve in that first Sabbath, "Keep this Sabbath holy." It wasn't holy yet. Because it was made holy by God's rest, as we read. Third point. How could God tell Adam and Eve how to keep the Sabbath without first giving them an example of how to keep it? Let me read you from the Spirit of Prophecy. This is so clear that even a child can understand it. This is Patriarchs and Prophets, page 47. After resting upon the seventh day, God sanctified it. Now, what part of after don't you understand? After resting upon the seventh day, God sanctified it or set it apart as a day of rest for man. When did God set the Sabbath apart as a day of rest for man? After He rested on the Sabbath. So that first Sabbath is the Lord's Sabbath. He rested on that Sabbath, and then He gives the Sabbath to man. She continues saying the reason why. After resting upon the seventh day, God sanctified it or set it apart as a day of rest for man. Following the example of the Creator, man was to rest upon this sacred day, that as he should look upon the heavens and the earth, he might reflect upon God's great work of creation, and that as he should behold the evidences of God's wisdom and goodness, his heart might be filled with love and reverence for his Maker. In Desire of Ages 281, Ellen White wrote, because he had rested on the Sabbath, God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, set it apart to all use. He gave it to Adam as a day of rest. So when did He give it to Adam as a day of rest? After He created it. After He rested on it. Now the greatest argument that why God did not command Adam and Eve to keep that first Sabbath is in the fourth commandment. Listen carefully. The fourth commandment applies to Adam and Eve beginning with the second week of the history of this world. You say, how's that? What does the fourth commandment say? Work 6 and rest the seventh. Could Adam and Eve obey that commandment? No, because they had not worked 6. So what God does is He works 6, He rests on the seventh, blesses and sanctifies the day, sets it apart, gives it to Adam, and then He says, Adam, now you're going to work 6, and next Sabbath you're going to rest the way you saw me rest. That's why God did not command Adam and Eve to keep the Sabbath, because it was not their Sabbath, it was first His Sabbath. And then He gives it as a gift to man. But you know, the Sabbath is not only a sign of the Creator. It's not only the sign of the Redeemer. It's also the sign of the future Restorer. Go with me to Isaiah 66, 22 and 23. You know, in one of our previous studies together, we noticed that this world is going to be reduced to chaos and disorder by the plagues in the second coming. Jeremiah saw this world. He said it was without form and void, and the heavens had no light. Everything will have been destroyed by the plagues and by the second coming of Jesus. This world will be inhospitable, uninhabitable. So God is going to have to make a new heavens and a new earth. He's going to have to do what He did at the beginning. He's going to have to recreate, if you please, the heavens and the earth. Now, notice Isaiah 66 and verses 22 and 23. For as the new heavens and the new earth. Is that the same new heaven and new earth that we find in Revelation chapter 20 and 21 and 22? Yes. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your descendants and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, don't get all caught up in the new moon. The new moon simply means month. It should be translated month. The Spanish version says from month to month. You say, well, why are we going to worship the Lord every month? The reason is simple, because there's a tree that produces its fruit every month. According to Revelation 22, verse 2. We're going to go to eat from the tree of life every month. So it says, from one new moon to another, that is, from one month to another, and from one what? One Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says the Lord. What will be the memorial of the new creation? The observance of the Sabbath. God says, I'm going to create a new heavens and a new earth. Then He says, every Sabbath you're going to come to worship me to commemorate the fact that I am the creator of the new heavens and the new earth. Now let me ask you this. In how many days do you think Jesus is going to recreate this earth? You know, I used to think that Jesus would simply say, let everything be fixed. Everything is back like it was at the beginning. But then I got to thinking, I said, now wait a minute. When God makes a new heavens and a new earth, He must use a week like He did at the beginning. You say, why is that? Because it says that we're going to go the seventh day to commemorate the new creation of the heavens and the earth, and you can't have a seventh unless you have the first six. Did you get that or not? So God is going to, imagine, this is the wonderful thing. At the beginning, Adam and Eve didn't see God create anything. Did Adam and Eve see God create the light? The firmament? The vegetation? Sun, moon, and stars? The birds, the fish? The land animals? Did Adam see his own creation? Of course not. Did Adam see the creation of Eve? No, God put him to sleep. How could they be sure that God was the creator? Because God said so. They had to accept it by faith. But the beautiful thing is that when God makes a new heavens and a new earth, God's people will be alive. We will be eyewitnesses of the new creation. Imagine the first day God saying, let there be light, because the planet is in darkness during the 1,000 years. God says, let there be light. Let there be the firmament. The fresh air to breathe. Let the earth become a gigantic botanical garden. Sun, moon, and stars occupy your places because they were moved out of their places by the voice of God. So God places them where they can benefit the earth. And God's people are there, spectators. Let there be birds in the air and fish in the waters. And it is so. Let there be land animals. And then when God finishes His work the sixth day, He says to Adam and Eve, and all of the redeemed, He says, What do you think? Oh, Lord, this is beautiful. So God is going to say, what do you think? Don't you think it would be a great idea for us just to spend all of this day together beholding and contemplating what I made? Do you think that the redeemed are going to say, Lord, how is it that you give us this yoke of bondage? No. They say, wow, you made all this new for us. Oh, Lord, let's spend all Sabbath together to contemplate what you made so that we can see what a wonderful God you are. The Bible tells us that the observance of the Sabbath is a sign between God and His people. Exodus chapter 31, verses 16 and 17. Exodus 31, verses 16 and 17. And many have misunderstood this verse here. It says, therefore, the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath. So people say, the Sabbath's only for Israel. The children of Israel will keep the Sabbath. Does it say that it's exclusively for Israel? No, it doesn't say it's exclusive. Why would God say the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath? Because those were His people at that moment. He wasn't going to say, church, keep the Sabbath, because the church didn't exist yet. He's speaking to His people at that time. Israel, the Sabbath is a sign. Keep it. If He was speaking today to the church, He would say, like He does through Ellen White, keep what? Keep the Sabbath. By the way, God gave all 10 commandments to the Jews. Did God give all of the 10 commandments to Israel at Mount Sinai? Yes or no? So all of the 10 commandments apply only to the Jews. We can kill and we can commit adultery and we can covet, we can have other gods and so on, because the 10 commandments were given to the Jews. So why do Christians say that the Sabbath is for the Jews, but the other 9 commandments that were given for the Jews are for everybody? It just doesn't make any sense. God gave the 10 commandments and the Sabbath to the Jews because those were His people at that time. So that's why it says, therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. And then He explains why. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day He rested and was refreshed. The Sabbath is a sign between God and His people. Notice Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12 and verse 20. Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12 and verse 20. Once again, the Sabbath is spoken of as a sign. Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them. Verse 20. Hallow my Sabbaths, and they will be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. Now, when you look at the 3 angels' messages, you'll find that there's a contrast between the first and the third. The first angel's message tells us, fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment has come, and worship Him who created. The first angel's message says, worship the Creator. The third message says, don't worship the beast. Do you see the contrast? So the end time contrast is between worshiping the Creator or worshiping the beast. Does God have a sign? What is the sign? The Sabbath. Does the beast also have a sign? What is the sign? It must be a day. It must be an opposite day that glorifies and honors the beast. Now, we have identified the beast as the Roman Catholic papacy. And I want to share with you now the Roman Catholic view of the day of rest. And it's important because the papacy is the power spoken of as the Antichrist, who attempted to change God's holy law. Now, in spite of the fact that the Bible, without exception, refers to the 7th-day Sabbath as God's day of rest, Pope John Paul II, in his apostolic letter, Dies Domini, on the Lord's Day, and Francis I, in his encyclical Laudato Si, have declared that the seventh day is Jewish and the Christian Sabbath is Sunday. The papacy claims that the Sabbath is a relic of the Jewish Old Covenant. And yet the Roman Catholic Church continues to have all kinds of practices that are Old Covenant practices, like offering sacrifices, using holy vestments, sprinkling holy water, burning incense, lighting candles, making shrines. Those are Old Covenant practices that are not commanded in the New Testament. They continue the Old Covenant when they come to these things, but when it comes to the Sabbath, they say the Sabbath was something that belonged to the Jews in the Old Covenant. But even more telling than what these very famous popes had to say about the Sabbath, that it was for the Jews, it was for the Old Covenant, the Christian Sabbath is now Sunday, even more seriously than that, neither John Paul II nor Francis I actually believe. John Paul is dead, of course. He didn't believe, and Francis I does not believe, that the story of creation happened as it is written in the book of Genesis. They believe that that story is a legend or a myth. It teaches spiritual truth, but it's symbolic. The days of creation were not literal. They were millions and millions of years. And this whole world came into existence through a process of evolution. That's what the papacy teaches. I want to read a statement. I have two here. One from John Paul. I'll just read one little part of it. He says that the research that has been done in the different scientific disciplines has proven that this theory of evolution is more than just a theory. In fact, he says that this research by these different disciplines is a significant argument in favor of the theory. Francis I said this: the Big Bang, which today we hold to be the origin of the world. See, he's saying the papacy believes that the Big Bang gave an origin to the world. The Big Bang, which today we hold to be the origin of the world, does not contradict the intervention of the divine creator, but rather requires it. Evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation, because evolution requires the creation of beings that evolve. When we read about, listen to this, when we read about creation in Genesis, we run the risk of imagining God was a magician with a magic wand able to do everything, but that is not so. He created human beings and let them develop according to the internal laws that He gave to each one so that they would reach their fulfillment. So the papacy today does not teach that the story of creation is a literal story. It didn't happen that way. It's a symbolic story, and creation has taken place over millions of years, actually through a process of evolution. Now, this has serious implications. First of all, on what do we base the idea that marriage should be between a man and a woman? On the literalness of the Genesis story. If that story is not literal, how can you defend marriage as being between a man and a woman? The Sabbath depends on a literal story of creation. So if you say that there were millions of years and not literal days, the Sabbath disappears in a midst. What about gender identity? Is Genesis clear on gender identity? Male and female created He them. But when you throw out the creation story, you can have many, many different genders invented by human beings. Because if the story didn't literally take place, how do you know that there's only two genders, male and female? Furthermore, it becomes even more complicated. Francis I is always speaking about the need for the strong and the rich to help the poor and the needy. His recommendation totally goes against the theory of evolution, which he believes in, because evolution functions on the basis of the survival of the fittest. The strong win and the weak lose. So how can he say, if evolution is the strong win and the weak lose, how can he say that the strong should help the weak? His recommendation totally contradicts the theory that he teaches. And even further, folks, even further than this, how many more millions of years is it going to take for evolution to work out the wrinkles and defects so that we have a perfect society where everything has reached the climax of evolution? How many millions of years more do we have to wait? What does that do to the second coming of Jesus? It delays it into the distant future after the process of evolution is ended. That's the reason why the papacy does not talk about the second coming of Jesus. Because if they don't believe that creation was literal, are they really going to believe that the second coming of Jesus, a miraculous event, is going to be literal? Furthermore, their idea that for millions of years there was cruel death in the animal world, because they teach that for millions of years, animals were killing one another. The theory of evolution is a very bloody theory. There's death long before sin in the evolutionary model. Let me ask you, what does the idea of evolution do to the omnipotence of God? Isn't God powerful enough to make things right from the beginning? Can He speak and make things perfect? Does He have to use a mechanism like evolution that involves death and cruelty and suffering and pain in order to create perfect beings? No. God can get it right from the beginning because He is all-powerful. He is omnipotent. Can't a wise God get things right from the get-go? It's an attack on God's wisdom. Is it an attack on God's love and mercy? He's the God whose heart beats faster when a little bird falls out of a tree. How could He condone a theory where for millions of years animals are killing animals, the strong are killing the weak in the process of evolution? Furthermore, if the story of Genesis, by the way, they don't believe that the stories of Genesis 1 to 11 are literal. If that's true, then the story of the fall of man into sin is not literal. And if that story is not literal, we do not need a Savior. The only thing that needs to happen is that we need to develop to the point of where evolution reaches its climax of a perfect race and a perfect society. Those are the implications of the Roman Catholic view of creation. And of course they would attack the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is based on a literal creation story. So what is the final controversy going to be about? Listen, the greatest controversies that Jesus had in His day was over the Sabbath. Is that true? Constantly Jesus was in conflict with the religionists of His day because of the way that they kept the Sabbath. In other words, the issue in the times of Christ was the way. They kept the Sabbath in the wrong way. At the end of history, the conflict is not going to be over the wrong way, but over the wrong day. Are you with me? Now, you're saying, Pastor Bohr, you're saying that the final controversy, the final conflict is a conflict over days? There's something deeper than days in the final controversy. Let me ask you, according to Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, who created Sunday as the day of rest? According to Daniel 7:25, who changed the law in his mind and established Sunday as the day of rest? The papacy, the Antichrist. So what are you doing when you observe Sunday as the day of rest? Whose authority are you recognizing? You are recognizing the papacy's authority. By keeping the day, you're recognizing the authority that claims to establish the day as a day of worship. On the other hand, when you keep the Sabbath, who established the Sabbath? God established the Sabbath. So when you keep the Sabbath, you are recognizing the authority of the person who created the Sabbath. So behind this issue of one day versus another is the issue of authority. Do you accept the authority of God by keeping His Sabbath? That's the seal of God. Or do you accept the authority of the papacy by keeping Sunday as a day of rest? That is the issue. And you know, Sabbath and Sunday are exactly opposites. You know, we're used to looking at the calendar, and you know, you have Sabbath, which is the seventh day, and then you have the first day of the week. But really, when you look at it more carefully, the Sabbath and Sunday are on opposite sides of the spectrum, because Sunday is number 1 and the Sabbath is number 7. They're opposites. Now let me ask you, what comes first, the genuine or the counterfeit? The genuine, right? Or do we have a case where the counterfeiters say, hey, let's make a counterfeit $30 bill. And the government says, that's a great idea. Let's make a genuine one. Of course not. You have, first of all, the genuine. And then after the genuine, at some point, the counterfeiters counterfeit. Now let me ask you, what is the original day of worship that God established as a day to recognize Him as the Creator? It's the Sabbath. Do you think that perchance, sometime later in history, Satan would establish a day that would recognize his authority and make it pass off as God's day of rest? As a crafty counterfeit? Absolutely. That's what he's done. And Ellen White says that he's stolen the allegiance of the Christian world from the Creator God to the beast. And unfortunately, the Christian world doesn't even know it. They don't realize that eventually, by keeping Sunday, knowingly keeping Sunday, contrary to what the Bible teaches, means that they are going to receive the mark of the beast, they are going to worship the beast, and they will suffer the terrible punishment that is mentioned in the third angel's message. That's why we have a message to bring to them. To tell them, keep the Sabbath in honor of the Creator, because you love Jesus. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. If we love Jesus, we will want to spend the whole day with Him. Don't we enjoy spending time with the people we love? The more the better. So is it a great sacrifice for us to say, oh, now comes that Sabbath. I have 24 whole hours with the Lord. What a bore. No. If you love Jesus, you're going to want to extend the Sabbath a little bit before and after because you love Him. It's a memorial of His greatness, that He's the Creator. And may we recognize that and share this truth with the world is my prayer.